like we said, this week we are celebrating young women who are making boss moves in the public service. Rose Washuka has been here before. Today she's speaking from the current office. She is the Chief of Staff in the office of the Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court. Good morning, Rose.
Good morning.
Good to
morning,
have
Eric.
you again on the show. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very
Last
much.
time we were talking about sports because you had previously served as Chief of Staff in the office of the Cabinet Secretary for Sports and those other things. Now it's Chief of Staff in the office of the Chief Justice. And just
That's
before we got to the top of the hour, we were saying there are so many chiefs in the judiciary. Chief of Staff, Chief Justice, Chief Registrar, Chief Magistrate,
Most are women.
Chief. It's a nice one. You know how just to plug that in, didn't you?
But of
Okay.
Plugged it in nicely, huh?
Yeah, very nicely.
We were also talking about the energy sector. And they share similar characteristics. CS, a lady. KenGen, boss, lady. Kenya Power.
Board chair, lady. CEO, lady. Boss moves, eh?
there is power and justice.
It's the cream coming on top, finally.
Okay. Okay. What is the job of a chief of staff?
The chief of staff is really the facilitator in chief.
The chief word has to appear somewhere, right?
Well, the key facilitator. I always tell my colleagues that my role is to support what they do. But most importantly, to realize the vision of the Chief Justice. And what this means is that sitting where I am, I need to know exactly what's happening in the institution. And then I need to bring it all together to make everyone feel and everyone know that they have access to the Chief Justice, that their needs and their requests can be considered on time and, quickly. And so, I know many chiefs are gatekeepers, but very far from the truth. This is actually, the person who makes sure that the institution, the Chief Justice also has a global view of the institution. Connecting with external stakeholders, connecting with the office of the Chief Registrar, connecting with all the other directors, guiding on programs to just make sure that they align with the vision of the Chief Justice, consulting and seeking guidance from the Chief Justice, and then cascading that downwards. And so, essentially, it's the oil. It's the oil that keeps the institution connected to the office of the Chief Justice in all ways.
That sounds like a very, very difficult job.
It is. It's not easy.
Because if you're talking about connecting all the dots within the institution and then extending it to other partners, and given the jurisdiction in which you are working, goodness, I'm just thinking of the power that's at play, the egos that are at play, and then the stakes that are at play. Because, this is the law, the outcome, the interpretation of it, and the impact it has on people's lives. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Around the extent of this.
Yes, because I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about Chief of Staff, say, in State House. And I'm thinking, yes, when she says, to make this thing work, it clicked. And where it clicked was, one of the things that State House was notorious for a while back was delays in appointments. Meaning, you have an appointment to come and see the president, and you will wait. Then things changed. And there's a Chief of Staff. And suddenly, you hear reports, if you're told 11, it's 11.
It still leaves me confused. Because like you're saying, now in State House, there's a control of State House.
Yes.
There's the office of the ADC, and then there's a Chief of Staff.
Yes.
I'm just left confused. Same thing with the office of the Chief Justice that has a Chief of Staff. Now, you're not the administrative head of the office, are you? Or are you
Of the office of the CJ?
Yes.
I am.
Okay. But how many other people work in the office of the CJ? And
So-
are those not reporting to the chief registrar of the judiciary?
Actually, the office of the CJ is currently structured in such a way that the office is headed by the chief of staff. The chief of staff then coordinates the legal departments. That's headed by a senior legal counsel, and then assisting legal counsels in the legal department. There's a communications office. There's a protocol department. And then there's, of course, the registry, the CJ's registry, the front office staff, administrators. And so the chief of staff actually sits at the judiciary management team that is headed by the chief registrar. And that is where all the directors converge and report on the aspects, from their dockets.
Okay.
Now, you realize that the chief justice is the head of the judiciary. She's also the chairperson of the JSC, the chairperson of the National Council for Law Reporting, the chairperson for the National Council on Administration of Justice, and the president of the Supreme Court. So these 5 statutory mandates have to be coordinated by someone. And that coordinating role falls under my docket to just make sure that because of the breadth of work that the Chief Justice is expected to undertake, that the mechanisms and aspects laid out, the structures are so efficient as to ensure that that office touches all nodes, that all the as components of the Chief Justice's role are executed without any hitch. And so if I need to pull support from any of the directorates, then it will land on my desk to do that. If the Chief Justice is, for instance, opening a court, say in Kajiado, it will be my prerogative to figure out who needs to be engaged in that exercise and how that exercise can be coordinated safely, what the message of the Chief Justice ought to be, and how it resonates with the vision. And so it is a role that's very, very closely linked to the person, to the office holder. And it has to be a position of trust, which is what it is, that the holder of the office can trust you to manage the operations of the office without dropping the ball at any one time. And so when others are having, say, 8-hour days, I probably have 18-hour days. But the coordination, which is the most difficult part, if you get the coordination right, then efficiency, follows quickly.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of mechanics to this, even as you talk about it. And then you talk about the oil, which is absolutely necessary. And you're dealing with a docket that has clearly a lot in terms of demand from the inside. So there's the CJ's vision, which, I mean, you talked about putting this vision together. But then it's also a sector that has taken a lot of flack recently, and also high expectation from those who are on the outside looking in. How then will you be able to weave this coordination with the expectation that is coming from the outside, with the pressure that's coming from the outside, be it the general public, be it politicians, be it other arms of government?
It is true that there is a great expectation, which is why the vision is absolutely necessary, because the vision gives you certain fundamental prerequisites that guide the way in which we operate. So, for instance, dialogic approach to engagements is one key one. And what that means is that we have to be proactive to engage and deal with the pressure. Get used to those turbulent waters and learn how to swim in them, which is why the idea of Justice Thursdays by the Chief Justice is exceptional, because what it does is it allows the public a predictable time frame or a day where they expect the Chief Justice to be touching a public issue somewhere in the Republic. Of course, when she's not sitting in court. It also gives the internal stakeholders the same predictability to know that on Thursday, there are higher chances of getting audience with the Chief Justice, because, again, during the week, in the way the week is structured, you have to really take care of that time. And so, yes, the pressure is quite high. And that's why the members of staff have to be within the Office of the Chief Justice have to be very mentally stable, solid people. They have to have very solid self-care practices, but then they also have to be guided by some framework in terms of how do we do this when we encountered with a request from the public, what happens? And so those SOPs, standard operating procedures, when a complaint comes from the public, where does it go? It comes to my desk, it goes to the legal desk, the senior legal counsel. The senior legal counsel then discusses it with the Office of the Ombudsperson, and then we keep a dashboard of all the things that we're doing. And I track that dashboard to see what has come in, who is handling it, how far is it, and when do we expect a resolution, and have those deadlines been met? And you have to organize it in that way. It is very difficult to create structures, but once those structures are in place, then people start to know, and it starts to make sense that this is what happens. Because I think the public is always unhappy if their needs cannot be met by a public office that is charged with the mandate of meeting those objectives. On the inside, though, there are so many competing interests and so many competing priorities. And so what happens is that the bearer of the office of the chief of staff has to be a very organized person, and it's not an easy thing to do. You also need to learn how to delegate. It's, delegation for excellence, because you can't handle all these issues. What you do is you play the role of a DJ. You mix the music. And then you track to see, is the beat in rhythm? Is it in tune? Yeah.
Rosie, I listen to you and I get a sense that you are building an office from the ground up. Like, we didn't have this office with the predecessors of Justice Koome, Chief Justice Koome. For example, in the office of Chief Justice Maraga, did you have a Chief of Staff?
Yes.
Did we have that?
Yes, we did.
And
we've had 2 previous Chiefs of Staff. And the office, of course, started with the office of the Chief Justice, Willie Mutunga. Dan Kanukelo, a very seasoned...
yes, I remember that. Kanukelo, yeah.
And then in Chief Justice Maraga's time, the Chief of Staff, Dr. Conrad Bosire, was in office. The thing about this office of Chief of Staff is you have a blank slate. The way you manage the office and the way you organize it is entirely your prerogative. And so that's why it feels and looks like I'm building an office from the ground up, because I am responding to the needs of that office, but I'm also responding to the vision of the Chief Justice. The Honorable Chief Justice wants there to be a structure that can be passed forward to other Chief Justices, a structure that allows for that continuity, so that others who come after us or after her don't have to build documents, don't have to build the structures, that they can plug into already built structures that have been debated and discussed by the Judicial Service Commission and adopted. So we are in the phase of building structures, and we know we are going to be in this phase for at least the next 12 months. But we always say we are pushing the rock up the hill. Once it's up the hill, it will take very little effort to roll it downwards.
Let me ask the question. Do I hear you to be saying that this office up to now has not had what you may refer to as a manual of operation?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. So if it doesn't have a manual of operation, then it doesn't have standard operating procedures either.
So again, as I've said, it is. I think it's the same thing with regimes within the political space. That there are some positions that. You're handed a blank slate. Here is an office, structure it. Or here is a role description, structure it for delivery, which could be positive, but also sometimes not, because then you spend a lot of time trying to structure it as opposed to plugging into those structures, which is the position.
Actually, that's what I was thinking of, because if you are trying to give this skeleton flesh, it means your work in coordinating the affairs of people who relate to this office is greater. Coordinating the affairs on its own is not an issue, but the people involved.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see, getting them to see things in the way that you're structuring it. And remember, this is against a backdrop of people who are already used to doing things in a certain way. So if what you are doing is slightly different, I'm using the word slightly deliberately, then the natural human being is to give pushback, not to accept. And in our country, the way people do it is in a passive-aggressive way. No one tells you outrightly they're not going to do it. But all indications that they're not doing it.
And all your questions are just going nowhere.
Yes. And in a meeting, people agree with you. In fact, some even tell you that's a very good idea, but nothing moves.
Yeah. There is, I have to say, because I've been in 3 chief of staff roles in the public service, in 2 ministries and now in the judiciary. But there's something different about the judiciary. And this has been evident in the 3 months, going to 4 months that the Chief Justice has been in office. I've been there for 2, is that there is exceptional cooperation. I don't know if it's the culture of the institution, excuse me, but there is just exceptional cooperation. It is, they apply this aspect of enterprise leadership, where they pull together in sort of like a multi-agency way to move things forward. And because the position of Chief of Staff has been, at least in 2 previous regimes, people have an understanding of what this position is meant to do. And I have to give props to Duncan, because he was the pioneer and he set the pace for this positional interaction with the rest of the judiciary. And so it's sort of like the moving bearing that anchors the rotation.
It basically tells you what to expect in this structure, what to put together in the structure.
Yeah, but I also hear what Muga is saying, that you might encounter microaggressions, but you have to be very emotionally attuned to notice them and then to know how to deal with them. And so it's also a role that requires a very high socio and emotional intelligence, because you see those microaggressions and then you're able to forecast what might happen. And if you need to engage another person, then you can do that. If you need to have an open conversation, then you can do that. If you need to change tact, then you can do that. But it also requires a lot of flexibility.
I like what you said about the cooperation and how people work together. It therefore means that within the judiciary, they will support each other. And that gives them strength. It means they can actually carry out their duties knowing full well that so long as one is doing what they're supposed to do, the
boat is moving.
Yes, and the colleagues will support them. But there's a problem with that also. When people get along that well, they then form a cartel.
And yet any external entry is treated as an outsider.
Yes, or any perspective that differs from the
established.
Yes, is not considered favorably. But I like the fact that they cooperate.
It's a thing of trying to strike a balance between there's an established tradition, which is good because it's a tradition and then it makes the whole organization move well. But if you come in with some extra ideas, you sound like you're a disruptor. Well, and it takes a while then for the tradition to basically accept this new thing.
I do agree that the formation of cartels requires cooperation as a core ingredient, right? However, it also requires joint interest. And in most cases, that interest takes the form of either an economic or intellectual form. And if you look at the history of the post-2010 judiciary, I mean, pre-2010, you only had one registrar of the judiciary. You had a judiciary that was basically a skeleton of an institution. And then, enters the constitution that sort of ruffles and changes and moves things around in a very dramatic way, especially for the judiciary. So you have the introduction of the office of the chief registrar, you have the creation of the Supreme Court, you have the constitutionalization of the Judicial Service Commission, you have, just a flurry of changes within the judiciary. And that's because it was an institution that was marked for massive change. So we had an overhaul of an institution that has really struggled to embrace that new look. And it has taken 10 years to get to where we are. But if you look back, it's a very different institution with very different structures. Who would have thought that a judiciary would incorporate and accept a private sector model of directorships within the institution that now seems to work very well? Even so, the use of ICT and digitization of the judiciary has been an ongoing cause since the 1997, when the the then Justice Ringera tried to digitize the Court of Appeal, and then it starts in earnest with the Judiciary Transformation Framework, which is why I think Chief Justice Mutunga was quite intent on calling it Transformation Framework, and then Chief Justice Maraga picked up by calling it the Sustaining Judiciary Transformation. We are now working on the third framework, and we'll see where that goes. But Chief Justice Martha Koome has decided to take that even further, because if you consider that the past 10 years, the judiciary has focused on building itself as an institution, laying the framework, laying the groundwork, changing the work culture. And it is now, from data within the institution, which is an institution that actually is guided by data. Judicial policy is guided by data. There's an entire department on data. It has statisticians and economists, which is quite monumental. So it was very inward focused in building the institution itself, which is understandable, because the institution had to really start from scratch. But now it is time for that institution to now open itself up to the public, hence access, social transformation through access to justice. It is now time to open those structures up to the Kenyan public. We have 27 courts now that have been built across the country by the JPIP project of the World Bank. We have expanded small claims courts that have been established. You have ADR that has been alternative dispute resolution that has been institutionalized. You have alternative justice systems that have been institutionalized. And so it is now an opportune time for Kenyans to really engage with that sector in the most efficient way possible. Because the institution now is ready. It has its structures.
It's now ready to serve us better.
It's now ready to serve better.
Okay. Social transformation through access to justice. That is Chief Justice Martha Koome's strategic focus as she now takes the reins of the judiciary. And her Chief of Staff, Rose Washuka, is in the studio, basically telling us what this whole transformation is and how we are going to be able to make sure that we access justice better. In the Situation Room this morning is Eric Latif, Ndu Oko, C.T. Muga, and Rose Washuka, Chief of Staff in the office of the Chief Justice. Now, Rose, you're telling us about the strategic focus of Chief Justice Martha Koome, which is social transformation through access to justice. And as the Chief of Staff in her office, you said, and you explained it very well, it's your job to make sure that Martha Koome actually delivers on what she intends to deliver. So how are we going about rolling out this social transformation through access to justice? What are the main ingredients of this strategic focus that then need to work and move together so that we can realize this dream? Great.
As I explained before, this social transformation focus is on really expanding the doors to justice. And I'll paint a picture. If you are if your child has been defiled in Kasarani and you need to access justice, what options do you have? You need to engage with the police. You need to engage with the hospital, the doctor, and then you need to engage with the justice system. And in order for the justice system to determine the matter properly, the evidence has to be preserved. And Kizi was here and she spoke about preserving that evidence. And what the vision of the Chief Justice is that there will be an immediate access. There will be courts and institutions of the judiciary that are close enough to the people that they don't have to exert themselves and their resources to access them. Which is why some of the vision actually highlights small claims courts in Nairobi's informal settlements as part of the game changers within this component. The other aspects that have been laid out is just it's broken up into 5 expected outcomes, and the first is just creating an institution that is independent and strong, efficient, effective. And some of the components of that is the establishment of the Judiciary Fund, and the process to make sure that happens is well underway, to really make sure that the outlook of the institution to internal stakeholders and external stakeholders remains very steady, that the output of the institution remains true to the Constitution and the Kenyan people who've given the judiciary the mandate. The second one is that there's an inspired team of judges, judicial officers, and judiciary staff. And this is, this is going to be rolled out by making sure that the staff welfare within the judiciary is really up to scratch. Post-COVID, the system has suffered a lot of shocks. All of us have suffered a lot of shocks. But how do you facilitate the people who work within the judiciary to remain motivated? Because if I'm not inspired or motivated, the experience of the customer, of the Kenyan person engaging with the judiciary will be different. And so the idea that the Chief Justice has is to put in place a state-of-the-art judicial service academy. And it's an academy because it is meant to bring everybody together to really debate and talk about how to train, inspire, mentor. It will be a hub of connection and conversation. The third one is the financial mechanisms within the judiciary, that the judiciary is accountable, that the judiciary is adequately funded, that the judiciary is absorbing the resources it has, but that the judiciary is also open to scrutiny and to question. The other one is this idea of shared leadership. Because as I've said, the Chief Justice has 5 statutory mandates, and that the Chief Justice has to manage all those portfolios. However, there are judges and judicial officers within the judiciary who can steer some of those. And so instead of holding on to all those aspects, the judiciary, the Chief Justice is employing a system of shared leadership so that it trickles down to the Kenyan person through the National Council Administration of Justice, through the Court Users Committee, in all court stations that have lawyers, that have the Office of the DPP, the police, the business persons, everybody in that court station. And then the final one is this idea of coordination, because you have to coordinate the justice sector. It has 2 components. It has the access to justice. So I need to go to court. I need to be heard. I need to be heard expeditiously. That's one component. That's access to justice. Then there's administration of justice. Administration of justice is how are these core players interacting? And are they interacting to support access? And are they interacting to make sure that justice is realized by the Kenyan person? So these 5 components are what marks the vision. Now that's the vision, which is a different approach to what has been done previously by her 2 predecessors. So you set out the vision and you give the broad imprint of of the tenets that her leadership embraces. Now, during this time, we will now go into a process of writing the actual framework. The framework will have the execution prerogatives or prerequisites but it will infuse the ideals of the vision into the framework. And so it's a 2-tier process, and it's very deliberate as a 2-tier process, so that, this is where we want to go together. And the vision was negotiated. As you can see, it's fairly small. It's quite tiny. I know, it's not the 200, 500 pages usually that mark and characterize these strategic plans.
It's 50 pages.
It's quite tiny if you think about it.
Yeah.
You can read it in...
It's an abridged version.
It's very small. And so the idea is that whenever anyone in the judiciary is working on a strategic plan or a work plan, going forward, that before the strategic plan itself, which takes a little longer, is finalized, and we expect it to be out by the end of March, that they are guided on the principles and the outcomes for this institution. And so I've been engaging with various entities. Now is the time people are writing their strategic plans, their registry manuals, and the uptake has been quite good because they always go back to the STAJ. The short form is STAJ. And there's an idea that's clicking in the judiciary now that as an institution, we have built the parameters and the mechanisms to serve the public. So now let us focus on the Kenyan people. Let us make sure that if we are digitizing, we are not digitizing to block a litigant from coming to court. We are digitizing in a dual way to make sure that access to justice is not compromised. And it's important for people to understand that the end goal is access to justice. Whatever else you do has to speak to that idea of access to justice, which is why the vision is quite monumental. So there's an understanding that access to justice in a way that is very friendly and very impacting to the Kenyan people is what actually now this next leadership is very, very keen about.
In order to deliver this, obviously, there's monumental support that is required. And oftentimes we've seen this report this support hinged on money, hinged on vital resources to have this done. The judiciary has previously been besieged with a lack of this kind of support. Absolutely. And has often been crying out, we need more in terms of budgets. People have often said at the same time that you're not truly independent if you're not able to call how much you can spend. In order to deliver this, however, that support is necessary.
It is.
And it's one of the things I believe she spoke of when we spoke to her a few weeks ago. Yeah. How then do you see that the lack thereof of that support would impact this vision that everybody's clearly working so hard on?
That's an incredible question because resources are quite a significant aspect of unlocking and realizing this vision. What we must understand, and what I hope and pray that we can all understand, is that this mandate to deliver justice to Kenyans is a shared mandate, so that if the judiciary is starved of resources, the Kenyan person is denied justice. Okay? And so it is a non-negotiable element that the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary have to work together for the Kenyan people. Article 1 of the Constitution gives the sovereignty. The Kenyan person is the boss. The public is the boss. And so when the judiciary requests for a budget allocation of 70 billion or 30 billion and gets 17 billion, there is a critical shortfall that ought to be bridged, which is why the conversations that are happening at the very high levels of government on resourcing and financing the judiciary are quite monumental. Development partners have put in quite a lot of money, upwards of 14 billion into the judiciary, through the World Bank JPIP project, through the European Union PLID project, and others. IDLO and others have really supported the judiciary. However, this aspect of, think of it like this: it is not the judiciary that is being supported. It is the right of the Kenyan person to access justice that is being supported. And so if we have a society that doesn't feel heard, that doesn't feel that their grievances are addressed in the most efficient way, either because we have inadequate infrastructure or inadequate resources, then you have a society that is unstable. No matter what other interventions you have in any other sector, that still remains, because justice is cross-cutting, and justice is justice in resource allocation, justice in everything. Think of it like this. We have about 700,000 cases pending in court right now, right? If you quantify those 700,000 cases, the amount of money trapped within the judiciary is upwards billions of money. The introduction of the court annexed mediation, which is a form of alternative dispute resolution, has managed to free up about 500 million of 2.5 billion shillings stuck in only 22 court stations in the country. And we have upwards of 128. So imagine if we put in, say, 100 billion into the judiciary, we could easily free and release into the economy upwards of 500 billion stuck in the judiciary. And so we have to approach this from a cost-benefit analysis with the Kenyan people at the heart of it. So yes, lack of resources will hinder. It is a structural impediment to that realization of the Kenyans' right to of access to justice. And these are conversations that we must continue to have. We must continue to dialogue, and everybody must get concerned and engaged in persuading that the judiciary is actually resourced properly.
Do you think there are people who don't get this? Do you think there are people who, within the judiciary, outside the judiciary, who don't get the importance of financing, of funding, properly funding the judiciary?
I think so. Because if we were all on the same page, we wouldn't be having a conversation about inadequate resources in a sector that is so critical.
Is it that they don't get it, or is that they get it but they choose deliberately to ignore this?
Well, I don't want to cast aspersions, but I do believe that there has been probably a misguided notion that the judiciary is blocks certain interests. But the judiciary is really, as the Chief Justice likes to put it, one leg of a three-legged stool. That without it, the stool cannot stand.
And there's nowhere for the Kenyan people to sit.
If we want to improve the Kenyan economy, we have to also invest in making sure that Kenyans can do business with each other and their disputes can be resolved when they arise, right? And that is part of. I mean, that's the thinking that we want people to understand. And the Chief Justice is very clear that we must continue to have these conversations. And I loved today's proverb that can a dog crack a bone that a hyena hasn't cracked? It's been an ongoing struggle to resource the judiciary. But actually, when you are expressing that proverb, I thought, unless the dog has the persistence and the agility to really struggle with the bone, there's an aspect of time. How much time does a dog have, vis-a-vis how much the hyena had,
energy.
And we can theorize it in that way. But resourcing the judiciary is quite critical, not for the judiciary itself, but for the Kenyan people and actually for the economy, because we've been cracking the numbers, and we know that we have billions, a couple of billions, stuck in the commercial division.
So what is the Chief Justice prepared to do to finally crack this bone? This is a conversation that has been had from Chief Justice Mutunga's time to Chief Justice Maraga's time. Operationalization of the judiciary fund. It's basic, it's stated, it's there.
Absolutely.
But it has just not been operationalized. And as the reason I was asking you is, when this was being put in the constitution, in the law, when these conversations were taking place, everybody understood what was meant.
Yeah.
If you go to the Houses of Parliament, everybody sees the reason why we need to operationalize the judiciary fund.
Absolutely.
But then they don't.
Yeah. So the good news, Eric, is that the authority to operationalize the fund is finally out. I am part of a committee from this that comprises professionals from the central bank, the judiciary itself, the Office of the Auditor General, and the National Treasury, that is working on the mechanisms and the parameters to actually fully operationalize it. And we have a deadline of the 1st of November for those structures to be fully in place. There is also a team that's working on the ICT system on which the judiciary fund is going to be anchored. And there is a firm commitment and which has been marked even by the way the judiciary is budgeting this year. The judiciary is now not in the sector, in the justice sector, but is doing its budgeting process independently as we prepare to load the allocation to the judiciary in the judiciary fund on the 1st of July 2022.
Could you explain the independent bit about the budgeting and the independence? And how it's what you're saying is differs from
what's going to be different
from what was done previously.
Yeah, so it gives a lot of flexibility to the judiciary to actually expend resources, because once money is put into the fund, it's not plowed. It doesn't go back to Treasury if it is unutilized at the end of the financial year. Also, it gives the judiciary a bit of autonomy when it comes to budgeting, because sectors have caps. So if you're in the justice sector and your cap is 200 billion, you have to budget within that 200 billion in your sector. And the sector has the police, it has the ODPP, it has all the actors within the justice sector. So if the judiciary is outside the sector, then the judiciary can budget according to the judiciary's needs.
Its own specific needs.
Its own specific needs, as opposed to limiting itself to the cap that is presented to the sector.
Something that always bothers me, all these changes are wonderful and I like them. The alternate conflict resolution mechanisms, I know they work. We have more arbitrators. It works because I know people in that space. But for most citizens, their matters end up in court.
Yes.
This morning we're looking at a case of a young lady who was defiled. This case took 5 years.
Yes.
Okay. She was 14. She's probably now 19. So I'm asking the question, all these things, how do they translate into that justice being received expeditiously?
Exactly. And this broadening doorways of justice, I mean, the judiciary is one component of multiple actors.
Yes.
Yeah. So you need all these actors to move together, which is why the NCAJ was created. The National Council on Administration of Justice has all the actors within the justice sector, including civil society, professional bodies, coming together to discuss this aspect. So if the police are having a challenge or are having structural impediments in collecting and presenting evidence to the court, or if the judiciary is having a problem managing the way lawyers conduct the case, or if the ODPP is having, one problem or the other, the entire system collapses, which is really the thing that has to be cracked for the Kenyan people. And people have to come together to see, if you have a case of defilement, it is truly not justice to keep that case pending even for more than 2 years, not even 5, even 2 years. So what are we prepared to do to make sure that that can be realized? And I would be lying if I said that I have the magic wand, that any one of us has the magic wand. It has to be a collaborative effort, which is why the Chief Justice is very clear that this aspect of dialogue, we must be able to continuously speak with each other. Our teams have to be capable of coming together and working together to make sure that these structural impediments are removed. And one of the active ways that the Chief Justice is handling this is, one, in terms of managing the docket of the judge or of the judicial officer. She has now indicated in very clear terms that mandate rests with the judicial officer or the judge, that it is with the judiciary. So as a lawyer, if you want to seek an adjournment, the judge or judicial officer can actually deny that call for adjournment. It's either you're willing to proceed with your case or you're not ready to proceed. But this idea of standing matters generally, obsolete language that needs to be, done away with in our civil and criminal procedures is the starting point. So that if you file a case as a litigant, it is not a mechanism to frustrate, which is sometimes what happens. And the challenges that confront children's matters, civil matters, criminal matters are varied. And we have to look at them in their varied forms. Cases of defilement are exceptionally sensitive and require like a one-stop response. And that one-stop response is, if a child has been defiled, that child can go to a one-stop center, which is what some of the proposals of establishing small claims courts in these informal settlements is going to address. That you can walk into a one-stop center where there is a police station, there is a government hospital, there is a court, and these entities can speak to each other because they're within the same vicinity.
Right.
And there's a court that actually specializes on sexual and gender-based violence, which is going to be one of the, some courts are going to be designated as such. And if we can crack this idea of one-stop centers, maybe we can start to see some shift, because, the evidence doesn't have to be transported 50 kilometers across. A child doesn't have to travel so far between a police station, between reporting and, reporting to the government hospital. So it's really just about investing in the way that we envision justice.
We've run out of time, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
You must come back again, because I want us to talk about this self-censorship. How the judiciary hopes to rein itself in and to be accountable to itself.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes.
A conversation to be had again. Rose,
happy to come again.
thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And
very
congratulations on the work that you're doing. And somebody actually put in a comment there. Moja says, these women seem focused in their public work. Proud of these young women and definitely taking Kenya forward. And I think that comment is shared by very many. We've been celebrating you and your colleagues, the young women who are making very big moves in public service. Monday, we had Dr. Kizi Shako, the police surgeon. On Tuesday, we had Emma Kithenji. She's the head of the Kenya School on Revenue Administration. Yesterday, we had the CAS in the Ministry of Health, Dr. Mercy Mwangangi. Today is Rose Washuka, the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Chief Justice. Tomorrow, we have another Chief Administrative Secretary for youth, and she'll be here. Thank you very much, Rose. All the best in all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Please pass our regards to the Chief Justice. Tell her she promised to be here in the room the next time.
Absolutely.
And now that we know who the office is, I think the message is home. Have a lovely day.
Thank you very, very much.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.